We begin today's inquiry with a subject of considerable complexity and historical weight, the presence and perception of Freemasonry within the East African nations of Tanzania and Zanzibar. This is not merely an examination of a fraternal organization, but rather a profound sociological analysis of a colonial institution, its struggle for survival in a post-colonial world, and its ultimate transformation into a potent symbol within the modern collective consciousness. We shall proceed to dissect this intricate history. It is imperative that we commence with the contemporary understanding with this very word, Masoni. In the Swahili vernacular of modern Tanzania, this term has become detached from its historical origins. It no longer simply signifies a Freemason. Instead, it has been imbued with a sinister and terrifying meaning, evoking images of a satanic cult, one that operates in the shadows to acquire wealth and power through unspeakable blood rituals. How a fraternity, founded on principles of enlightenment and mutual aid, could devolve into the object of such profound social fear is the central enigma that we shall endeavor to unravel throughout this analysis. Our investigation will follow a rigorous and logical progression. First, we will examine the genesis of Freemasonry as an esoteric network intrinsically linked to the colonial project. Second, we will chart its expansion from the coast across the mainland. Third, we will witness its confrontation with the forces of revolution and ideological suppression. Fourth, we will analyze the unique diplomatic strategy that ensured its survival. Fifth, we will dissect the sociological mechanics behind the birth of the modern Masoni conspiracy theory. And finally, we shall conclude by understanding how this history has culminated in the Masoni becoming a potent metaphor for contemporary social and economic anxieties. Our historical examination must therefore begin in the late 19th century, not on the vast African mainland, but on the small yet globally significant island of Zanzibar. This island was a geopolitical crucible, a unique convergence of commercial, political, and cultural forces. It was within this highly specific and charged environment that these seeds of East African Freemasonry first found fertile ground. To truly appreciate the singularity of Zanzibar's role, one must consider the profound contrast it presented with the mainland, then known as Tanganyika. The mainland was, at this time, largely isolated, a vast territory of diverse societies only just coming under the nascent control of the German Empire. Zanzibar, by contrast, was a nexus of global trade. Governed by the Omani sultanates, its economy was fueled by ivory, cloves, and, indeed, the slave trade. Its capital was a deeply cosmopolitan space, a meeting point for Arab potentates, Indian merchants, and European colonial agents. This open, stratified, and international character was the necessary precondition for an institution like Freemasonry to be established. The precise chain of events is critical to our understanding. In the mid-19th century, the Sultan's invitation to Indian merchants created a non-European commercial elite. Then, the pivotal year of 1890 saw Britain declare a protectorate, formally introducing the institutional and administrative apparatus of the British Empire. It was this combination, a pre-existing multi-ethnic elite and the arrival of the British ruling class, that created the social conditions for the founding of the first Masonic Lodge in 1904. The subsequent establishment of a second lodge by 1920 is a clear indicator of the consolidation of this colonial elite structure. The question then arises, what was the motivation for non-Europeans to join such a distinctly colonial institution? To comprehend this, we must turn to the work of the political theorist Hannah Arendt and her concept of the pariah/parvenu dynamic. This framework illuminates the strategy employed by a socially marginalized group, the pariah, who seek upward mobility and social acceptance not by challenging the existing power structure, but by assimilating into its most exclusive institutions, thereby aspiring to become a parvenu, an accepted newcomer. This quote perfectly encapsulates the application of Arendt's theory to the Zanzibari context. The influential Asian merchant class occupied a precarious position. They were designated as British protected persons, a legal status that afforded them some security but explicitly denied them political equality. Within the rigid colonial hierarchy, the Masonic Lodge became the sole, legitimate arena where these men could interact with the British ruling class on a stated principle of equality. It was a crucial vehicle for networking, for influence, and for navigating the complex power dynamics of the protectorate. It was, in essence, a rational strategy for survival and advancement. Having firmly established itself in the unique environment of Zanzibar, the stage was set for Freemasonry's expansion onto the mainland. This expansion was not an accident of history, but a direct consequence of the great geopolitical shifts that followed the First World War, which fundamentally redrew the colonial map of Africa. The defeat of the German Empire in 1918 was the precipitating event. The territory of German East Africa was transferred to British control under a League of Nations mandate and renamed Tanganyika. This was more than a mere change of flag. It represented the wholesale importation of the British colonial state. With the administrators, engineers, planters, and civil servants came their social institutions, and Freemasonry was an integral, if informal, component of this imperial apparatus. The data presented here reveals a clear and deliberate pattern of expansion. The first lodge was established in 1922 in the new colonial capital, Dar es Salaam. This was followed by lodges in Tanga, the vital port for the sisal industry, in Moshi and Arusha, the heart of the lucrative coffee-growing region near Kilimanjaro, and eventually in Mwanza, a strategic port on Lake Victoria. This geographic distribution is not random. It represents the creation of a network that precisely mirrored the administrative and economic infrastructure of the British colony. Each lodge was an anchor of colonial society and a key outpost of the empire. This chart provides a stark visual representation of this process. The steady, cumulative growth of Masonic lodges across Tanganyika is a direct proxy for the deepening and consolidation of British imperial power. Each new lodge signifies a greater presence of colonial personnel, a more entrenched administration, and a more robust network of influence connecting the key nodes of the territory. The graph does not simply depict the growth of a fraternity, it depicts the methodical construction of a colonial state. However, this colonial order, which seemed so permanent and systematically constructed, was built upon foundations of profound inequality. As the tide of decolonization swept across the African continent, this structure would be subjected to immense pressures. In Zanzibar, these pressures would culminate in a violent eruption that would not only end colonial rule, but utterly extinguish the Masonic presence on the island. The velocity of events during this period is staggering. Independence is granted in December of 1963. Barely 1 month later, in January 1964, the Arab-dominated government of the Sultan is violently overthrown in a bloody revolution, an uprising fueled by decades of deep-seated racial and class-based grievances. The old elite, the very constituency of the Masonic lodges, were targeted, with many killed or forced into exile. The subsequent merger with Tanganyika to form Tanzania sealed the fate of the old order. The revolution was total. The consequence for Freemasonry was not a gradual decline, but a sudden and absolute obliteration. The final entry in the timeline is stark. By the end of 1964, the United Grand Lodge of England officially erased the Zanzibar Lodge from its registers. The term erased is telling. It signifies a complete and total severance, a recognition that 60 years of Masonic history on the island had been irrevocably terminated by the force of revolution. It had ceased to exist. While the lodges of Zanzibar met a swift and violent end, Freemasonry on the mainland faced an entirely different, though no less existential threat. This was not the threat of revolutionary violence, but of a pervasive and powerful political ideology that sought to remake society from its foundations, an ideology that had no tolerance for an institution perceived as elitist, secretive, and foreign. This ideology was Ujamaa, a form of African socialism articulated by Tanzania's first president, Julius Nyerere. Rooted in the principles of economic self-reliance and the rejection of what was seen as exploitative foreign capitalism, Ujamaa led to the widespread nationalization of private industry. In this new political and economic landscape, a private society associated with the former colonial rulers and the now dispossessed capitalist class was an ideological anathema, a prime candidate for suppression by the new socialist state. And this brings us to a central paradox of the period. The Nyerere government proved adept at using the legal tools left behind by the British, such as the Society's Ordinance, to dismantle any independent civil society organizations that could challenge the authority of the single-party state. Trade unions and other associations were brought under state control. And yet, remarkably, Freemasonry was never explicitly banned. It was allowed to continue its existence, albeit in the shadows. The question, of course, is why? How did this particular institution survive? The survival of mainland Freemasonry can be attributed in large part to the acumen of one individual, Sir Andy Chanday.
A prominent Tanzanian businessman and a senior Freemason, Sir Andy was a master of diplomacy. Despite having his own businesses nationalized by the state, he skillfully cultivated and maintained a close personal relationship with President Nyerere himself. His strategy was one of calculated rebranding. He presented Freemasonry not as a secret society with colonial roots, but as an apolitical, multi-faith philanthropic organization. By emphasizing its charitable tenets of love, charity, and truth, and by drawing explicit parallels to harmless international service clubs like Rotary, he successfully rendered the organization politically innocuous in the eyes of the state. It was a masterclass in strategic survival.
Through this strategy of quiet diplomacy and public rebranding, Freemasonry endured the Ujamaa era. It survived by becoming inconspicuous. However, when it began to re-emerge in the more liberalized Tanzania of the late 20th century, it discovered that the public memory of its existence had not simply faded. Instead, the vacuum of knowledge had been filled by a new and terrifying myth, transforming its identity in the collective consciousness.
We are thus brought back to the central question that began our inquiry. Having traced its history from a club for colonial elites to a discrete society that survived socialism, we must now account for its final, grotesque transformation. How did this organization become synonymous with a demonic, occult power? What are the social and cultural forces that fueled this metamorphosis in the public imagination?
A significant part of the explanation lies in the rise of charismatic Pentecostal Christianity in Tanzania. Within the worldview promoted by certain influential preachers, the world is conceived as a spiritual battlefield between the forces of God and Satan. In this Manichaean narrative, the Masoni provided a perfect earthly manifestation of demonic power. It was a secret, wealthy, and powerful elite that could be readily linked to global conspiracy theories of a new world order. More importantly, in a society grappling with stark economic inequality, this myth provided a simple, supernatural explanation for wealth that seemed otherwise inexplicable. It was not the product of economic success, but of a satanic pact.
This belief system is not merely an abstract curiosity. It has tangible and indeed devastating real-world consequences. To illustrate the profound impact of this intangible belief on the material world, we will conclude our analysis with a final, tragic case study: the failure of the Star Homes project. The narrative of this project is a stark illustration of our thesis. The goal was noble: to construct modern, screened houses to protect some of the poorest families from malaria. These homes were offered entirely free of charge. Yet, the project met with significant resistance. A large number of the intended beneficiaries refused to occupy the new houses. The reason they gave was that they believed the homes were a trap, constructed by the Masoni for the express purpose of harvesting their blood in secret nocturnal rituals. A modern public health initiative was entirely derailed by a deep-seated belief in an occult conspiracy. The fear of the intangible was more powerful than the promise of a tangible good. In conclusion, Freemasonry in Tanzania today exists as a dual entity. On the one hand, there is the private, esoteric society, a continuation of the historical institution for its actual members. On the other hand, there exists the Masone, of the public imagination. This Masone is something else entirely. It is a powerful, capacious metaphor. It is a vessel into which are poured the unresolved traumas of the colonial past, the acute anxieties generated by a globalized capitalist economy, and a profound sense of helplessness before the opaque and seemingly inexplicable nature of power itself. It is a complex and tragic post-colonial legacy.
To be continued, support us. Please like and subscribe to our channel.